Hello everyone, I'm just doing a quick video here to show you a good example of proper bird food mixing that includes a lot of the dietary needs that a lot of birds require, but is also a good way to enrich your birds. Here I'm going to be preparing a dish for my society finches. I have 5 of them, and a dish for my pigeon. I only have one of him. He's upstairs, and he's a little mean. So what I do for all of my birds is I do a base. So for my finches, I do a KT40 diet finch and canary feed. And for my pigeon, I do a KT Supreme uh, dove and pigeon feed. So for Twitch, he's my pigeon. I do a quarter of a cup here of this base feed. Put that in there, and then I do a half of a quarter of a cup of this Dodge grain feed my mother got me at Dodge Grain. Since I don't really know what exactly is in it, I try to limit his consumption of it, but he seems to really like it, which indicates to me that there's a lot of high sugar items in here. You can kind of see like a corn and other like a chicken scratch type materials. So like I said, I try to limit that. Then I kind of mix it in. Just lightly mix it in. Like that. Just kind of try to get it to really mix in, because if you don't mix it in, your bird will most likely just eat parts of it and leave the rest that they don't like. So it's important that you mix it up for them. So there's going to be a bit of background noise, so just kind of ignore that. I have a family, sorry. What I usually do next is I add the supplements. So I had a half a teaspoon of leafy greens and herbs sunburst, half a teaspoon of KT bird greens, and a full teaspoon of the fruits and veggies sunburst. I find that this really balances it out. I grind up some raw mixed nuts. If you're going to do this, make sure they're unsalted, and make sure you crack them open for your bird if they are not a parrot. If your bird is a parrot of any kind, budgie, conure, macaw, don't do that, because the birds have sharp beaks, and cracking them open is a good way for them to enrich themselves, and it also helps grind down their beak naturally. But for other birds, it really helps if you not grind it to a fine dust, but instead just crack them into small bits using this mortar and pestle here. And I'll also be adding some herbs. I got some basil, I got some lettuce, 2 different kinds. I got some rosemary, sage, or I guess not sage. Got some thyme, dill. I think this is parsley. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, I got some different herbs of a whole different kind bunch. Courtesy of Mother here. So as you can see, I have added the supplements, the 3 right here anyway, and I've mixed them in. Again, you gotta make sure that it's mixed in really well. If you're just making these for your own birds, don't really worry too much about sanitizing the equipment as you go. Obviously, you'll want to do it before and after, but since they're your own birds, you don't have to worry about intermixing really, unless the material is fresh and or your birds have very different dietary requirements, such as if you have a omnivorous species mixed in and you're making food for them, as well as an herbivorous species, like a strictly herbivorous species, then the intermixing and possible cross-contamination could be an issue. So as you can see, I have mixed this in pretty well here. And then next I'm going to cut up some of these herbs, and I'm going to put them into this dish. Okay, so just a quick little thing of how to prepare some of these herbs. For the rosemary, you're going to want to snip right underneath the bud. You're going to snip the stem into small pieces as to make it easier for them to eat it. Obviously, the smaller the bird, the smaller the pieces you want to cut. You just kind of keep doing that. For herbs such as rosemary, you're going to want to pluck the leaf off, and you're going to want to cut that into small pieces as well. Same rule, smaller the bird, the smaller the pieces. This is both to make it so that they're able to eat it, and so that they're able to eat it without the risk of choking. For the dill, you're going to want to kind of cut each piece off individually, cut the stem up until you get to the leaf, and then you're going to want to cut the leaves off individually. And for the leaf part itself, you can either use your fingers to tear it, or you can just kind of use the scissors to kind of snip it into little pieces. Because it's so fragile and pretty soft, you don't really have to worry about them not being able to tear it apart by themselves. Because as you can see, it's very flimsy. For like lettuce and stuff, you can just cut and trim the stems very easy. For the big leaves, you're gonna want to either tear apart from the middle part like that, and kind of just let it tear naturally, and then cut this in half, and then cut it into little pieces like that. I'll do that off camera. And then finally, for herbs such as parsley, you're just gonna want to kind of cut kind of like there, kind of along the seams, kind of crumple it up.
Parsley?
Yeah. Birds love parsley, and it's really good for them because it has a lot of vitamins in it. The dark greens have a lot of iron and vitamin K, and I will do the rest off camera. So I cut up the herbs for Twitch, and now I'm just going to put the scraps back in that kind of fell to the side, and I'm going to mix them in. Some of these herbs, the darker the herbs, they'll have more iron and vitamin B and vitamin K. The grains will give carbohydrates and starches that are needed for energy. The lighter greens will provide vitamin B, potentially vitamin A, depending on what kind they are and what part of the leaf I used. And the nuts I'm going to add in just a second will add protein and a little bit of salt, despite being unsalted, which will allow the birds to get a very nice, healthy, balanced diet. Usually I don't do all of this. I usually do a quick thing of the base feed and then the 3 supplements here. If I'm feeling really nice, I'll add some crushed nuts and maybe some sliced herbs, but I usually don't add all of them together. But I figured today, since my mom harvested a lot of herbs, that because they were overgrowing in her little garden, I might as well use a whole bunch of them, and I figured I might as well just add the nuts in because I was doing this video anyway. And it just gives a good example of a healthy variety of, herbs and food mixture. Okay, so I have a nut mix that I use to give to my birds. As I previously mentioned, it's raw, unsalted mixed nuts. You definitely want to make sure they're unsalted because salted nuts will may make your birds have an overdose of salt, for lack of a better term. So what I do is if you grind it like this, like side to side and pressing down, you're going to get like a fine dust, as you can see on the sides here. And that's fine, especially for smaller birds. But if you're using this for a bigger bird, like I do for my pigeon, you just kind of want to smash like this. As you can see, I have some almonds, cashews, a walnut, and I think that's a pistachio there, that green thing. So I'm just going to, if my camera could focus, not lightly, especially the almonds, you want to make sure you break them into pieces. And just going to, just kind of like this, you can kind of pour some of them into the mixture, and then pick out the parts that are still too big to continue to grind up. So for example, this too big, this and this too big, this is too big. Essentially anything that they couldn't really break on their own or swallow. Like, this is fine, it's a little on the bigger side, but since he's a bigger bird, he can handle it. And if you're feeding your birds nuts on the regular, you definitely want to make sure they have grit available if they're not an outside bird, because birds require grit in order to mechanically break down their food in one of their organs called the gizzard, because they do not have teeth. Well, some birds, such as ducks and geese and swans, have pseudo teeth, but they're not used like how we use them. They're used to mainly make sure that fish and aquatic vegetation don't slip out of their mouth in the water. So I'll do the rest of this off camera. I also cut up a little bit of pepper to put in them. These smaller pieces I'm going to feed to my finches. When you're dealing with smaller pieces like this, and for smaller birds, you definitely want to make sure that the pieces are pretty small, because if you feed them bigger pieces, the chances are higher that they might not be able to swallow it, and in that case, they'll usually throw it to the ground, and that increases the waste. And even if they do swallow it, it kind of increases the chance for choking or for it taking up too much space in their crop, which is where they store their food. And so it's good to just give smaller pieces for smaller birds, just as a rule of thumb. So, for example, these little pieces here, I'm going to give to my finches, and these bigger pieces here, I'm going to give to the pigeon. Just kind of see that. So the cool thing about feeding your birds peppers is that they're a really good source of water and various minerals and sugars and all that fun stuff, depending on the type of pepper. But the spiciness of the pepper does not affect the bird. So you could theoretically give your birds ghost peppers. I wouldn't really recommend it because the chances are high that you will accidentally touch your eyes or your nose or go to the bathroom forgetting to wash your hands first, and you will not have a fun time. But because birds do not have capsaicin receptors, which is the chemical that makes peppers spicy to us and to other mammals, they lack those receptors so that the birds can successfully eat the seeds of the peppers. And because birds don't have teeth, the chances are way lower that the seed will be ground into like a non-receptible, non-fertile item. So because of that, the birds will then fly, and then they'll poop out the fertile seeds somewhere around, and their poop will A, give a fertilization bonus, and B, spread the seeds to a larger area, and that benefits both the bird and the pepper, because the birds get a delicious, nutritious snack, while the pepper gets its offspring spread far and wide. So that's pretty cool. So if you're cutting up peppers, doesn't matter the spiciness, but definitely make sure that you wash your hands after cutting them up, and definitely make sure you cut them into the appropriate sizes. So this is a good size for your nuts to be at. As you can see, there's some larger pieces for them to kind of nibble on, and there's some smaller pieces that they can eat more easily. So what you're going to do is just kind of dump it here, and obviously there's going to be quite a bit stuck, and you can scrape those out with either the pestle or a measuring cup or anything like that, which I will do in a minute. But first, I'm just going to lightly mix this like this, just to make sure that, again, you want it evenly spread out all throughout it, because if it's not evenly spread out, the chances are higher that the bird will just pick around the parts they don't like and get to the parts they do like, and it's not really properly balanced. So definitely want to make sure everything's mixed in well, and once it is mixed in, you can move on to the next step. So now that the pigeon feed is done, we can move on to the finch feed. I actually have 5 finches at the moment. I used to have more, but 4 of them sadly passed away. There are 3 adults at the moment. Gaslight, Keep, and Girl Boss. Unfortunately, the 4th member that I got as my original group, Gators, did pass away, as well as 3 of the babies of Gaslight and Girl Boss. Which is pretty ironic considering how Girl Boss is the father, but the name stuck. So the 5 babies, 2 of them are alive now, and their names are Salt and Vinegar, Vinny for short, and they're very cute. So we're going to be making them some food in this cute orange feeder. And I actually got this at Petco. I recommend, if you need, like, obviously smaller local stores are better, but for pretty reasonably priced bird products of high quality, Petco is unfortunately your go-to, despite them being a large corporation. So got this at Petco, got most of this stuff at Petco. Petco is actually the only place I found that sells these big bags of dove food, so definitely a good option for that. As with the pigeon, I'm going to start with a base of the finch, of the classic food. Just going to take a scoop of this. So about I forget what this is. I think this is a tablespoon. So about a tablespoon can go in there. And then obviously we're gonna add another tablespoon a little later on after we add the supplements, and I will show you that in a moment. So now I have the supplements mixed in. And the reason, again, I use supplements is because the dried bird greens, especially, and the leafy greens and herbs, they offer a very nice mix of fruits and vegetables and all that fun stuff that, yes, you can add fresh, but I find that adding them dry does just give a little nice boost. And especially if you don't have access to fresh greens, these are a pretty good alternative. Obviously, fresh is usually better, but I find it's a nice little treat, and the birds really seem to enjoy it. It also adds a variety to their food that can help enrich them, and I just think they seem to really enjoy it. So I've added these, and now I'm going to cut up the fresh herbs, and I recommend doing it over something such as this, so that you can just for a container such as this, so you can easily just kind of drop it in like that, instead of having to worry about cutting over the feeder. And I'm also going to add in these peppers that I've cut up pretty small, and yeah, so they have a feeder upstairs. Finches can starve to death in as little as 12 hours. So I definitely made sure, if you're doing this, that they have food available while you're doing this, because this can take quite a while. I've actually been at this for about an hour now. And so definitely want to make sure they have food available. So they have their food upstairs. And I actually mixed in some songbird treat for them as well. So they enjoyed that. So I'm not going to... Usually I'll add in some songbird treat into this feeder. But I figured, since I'm adding all these fresh fruits... sorry, not fruits. These fresh herbs and the pepper, I would just put the songbird treat in the other one instead. So obviously for the herbs, you're going to want to cut them up into smaller pieces than you would for a larger bird. But what I've found is that the soft parts of the herbs, especially like dill, which is very soft, and the leafy parts of plants such as basil or lettuce, you can actually leave them into pretty surprisingly large strips. Obviously nothing too huge, like this is going to be way too big if I put it in whole, but something like this would seem pretty big for a small little finch, because those guys are tiny, but you'd be surprised how much of a soft leaf they can actually put in their mouth and actually eat. I've seen them tear off huge strips of parsley before to swallow them, and my first instinct upon seeing that was, sir, that is too big for you, you're going to choke. But because the leaves are so soft, they're surprisingly able to handle pretty big ones. Plants such as this rosemary, though, you can see it, yeah, you can't really see it, but it's too firm for them to really tear off easily. So I'd recommend cutting these into pretty small pieces. The stalks, I definitely recommend cutting into very small pieces, especially for parsley, because the stalks can be surprisingly hard, especially if you're very small. Plants such as this, you definitely want to make sure you cut the pieces into very thin, because it's pretty hard if it focuses. But, so, just a little side note. So, the good thing about using herbs such as these in your bird's food is that even if the herbs are slightly soggy, older, kind of wilting a little, you can still use them and your birds won't really care. Obviously, if the herbs are really old, if they're molding, if they're rotting, if they're really yucky looking, don't use them. But the foods that are kind of unappealing looking to us are still perfectly viable to be fed to your birds. Some foods you definitely want to avoid, such as potatoes, especially the skin, and onions. Potatoes can cause a condition called sour crop because they are so heavy in starches. And when the bird swallows these skins to put into their crop, which is, again, their storage space for food for them to digest, not in the crop, but in other parts and other organs, the starch can cause bacteria to grow, which can cause an infection of the crop, which can be fatal if untreated. Onions contain some toxins I don't really recall the name of, but they can be poisonous to birds. So definitely avoid onions of all kinds, including scallions, red onions, the little mini onion things. Avoid all onion types of the onion family. Another food to avoid is chocolate. Do not give any chocolate to your birds. Chocolate is poisonous to a lot of animals, including dogs, cats, lots of reptiles, rodents. So chocolate is a no-no for a lot of different species. I believe it has something to do with like xanthan or some sort of thing, some sort of sweetener like that that's toxic to a lot of organisms. So just a slight little amendment to something I said earlier. I said that you shouldn't feed potatoes to your birds, and by that I meant the potato skins and the flesh of the potato, for lack of a better word. The leaves of the potatoes are actually good for your birds, and in fact, this actually contains, I believe, sweet potato leaves as well, somewhere in here. Yeah, dehydrated sweet potatoes. May not be the leaves specifically, but sweet potatoes should be fine in low amounts, because they tend to be a little less starchy than, say, the big potatoes that you'd use in other cooking. So something like this you would not use, because this is way too starchy, way too sugary, and it would not be good for your birds. Onions, again, obviously a no-no, in any form, really. Even the leaves, I would not recommend giving them, because I don't really know too much about it, but I'd assume they'd still be pretty full of the toxins. So, that was just a quick little amendment to something I said. But while I'm at it, the reason you want to give your birds these mixed up diets here is that A, it helps to balance their diet, and that's something a lot of birds in captivity may suffer from, is that of lack of a variety of diet. Because if you look at this feed here, it has all the you can't really see it, but it has all the basic materials and feed that they would need, but that's a strict necessity. They still do require some vitamins that you can't really find in there. Usually it's not too big of an issue for birds, but I like my birds to be as healthy as they can be, and so I like giving them a very nice, well-balanced, nutritious food. It also has the added bonus of being very enriching, because the variety of textures, tastes, and sizes of the different foods offer a lot of mental stimulation. Take, for example, humans. We love, oh, most of us love, I don't really like it that much. A lot of people love to have a variety of food, like in salads, people want a lot of lettuce, tomatoes, croutons, a whole bunch of different stuff, because it offers a lot more mental stimulation to our taste buds and to our brains than, say, just a bland plate of like a mush would. So it's really good for them in a lot of different ways. Obviously, don't overdo it with some of the more starchy foods, and everything in moderation and all that. So while I do definitely recommend a diet high in herbs, obviously just don't go overboard. And so that's essentially it. So I finished mixing in the finch food, and just a few quick notes before I go is that birds with no access to sunlight or a vitamin light should be given more vitamin D in their food to make up for that possible deficiency. Unlike humans, so humans, guinea pigs, and capybaras, as far as I'm aware, are the only animals that cannot make vitamin C on our own. As far as I'm aware, all other animals can, including birds. And so you should avoid giving your birds too much vitamin C, because they could possibly overdose, because obviously they make their own. Whereas humans, it's pretty hard to overdose on vitamin C, because we don't have a base level in our systems that we make on our own. We have to get ours from food. So these peppers are typically full of vitamin C, and so you should only really give them to your birds on an occasional basis. Ignore the washing machine. So just something you should know. Same thing with oranges. Try to avoid giving them to them as an occasional treat is fine, but giving them too many could result in a vitamin overdose, and that is something to be aware of. Same thing with dark greens. So they're very high in iron, and birds typically don't need that much iron. Same thing in calcium-rich foods. It's great if the bird is molting or laying eggs or feeding young, but otherwise you should probably avoid giving them eggshells and all that fun stuff, unless they're chickens. Chickens lay a lot of eggs, and so they're usually in need of calcium. But, birds like pigeons and finches don't need a constant source of calcium. Some other vitamins, such as potassium, are fine in small amounts, but of course, everything in moderation. So, and of course, finches especially, are very small, and so they don't need quite as many vitamins as, say, larger birds such as pigeons do. And it, of course, also depends on the bird's metabolism, which is dependent on the bird's age, their breeding status, their sex, their size, and a whole bunch of other factors. So don't worry too much, I guess, about the proper nutrition of the birds. I know that sounds weird, but if your bird is having serious difficulties, I definitely recommend taking them to a vet and have a experienced nutritionist actually take a look at them. This is just a good home basis to establish some good dietary actions for your bird. Of course, take everything with a grain of salt, and not literally. Do not want to give your bird salt. That is bad for them, unless they have a salt deficiency. So, just take care of your birds, guys. If you guys like this video, I'll probably do something similar, such as maybe a tier list for the best foods to give your birds, or food prep for other animals, such as hamsters or something like that. So, like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and comment whether you want to see different types of this. Thank you.